They say the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Well, I am a goddamn redwood, and I have a memory that would make an elephant blush and hire a lawyer. This is the story of how I, the perennial black sheep of the Winthrop Smythe dynasty, finally stopped being the family's emotional support animal slash punching bag slash designated failure and orchestrated a reckoning so thorough that it involved 3 federal agencies, a missing Vermeer, and a llama named Mr. Snuggles. To understand the scale of the burn, you need to understand the landscape. My family, the Winthrop Smythes, are old money. Not invented the zipper money, but sailed over on the Mayflower and apologized to no one money. We have a compound in Newport that has its own Wikipedia page. We have a summer home in the Hamptons that we refer to, with infuriating casualness, as the cottage. The cottage has 17 bedrooms. I am the youngest of 3. My brother, Preston the Fourth, yes, they actually call him Fourth, is a managing director at a private equity firm where his main job seems to be wearing salmon-colored trousers and firing people with names like Dave. He was the golden child. My sister, Cordelia, married a French count with a receding hairline and a genuine, unironic title. She spends her days Instagramming pictures of her children looking miserable in matching Breton stripes, captioned with things like "a day of simple pleasures, #blessed, #chateau life." And then there was me, Eleanor, the difficult one. The one who, at age 8, was sent to a therapeutic boarding school in Utah for behavioral issues after I pointed out to my mother that her 3rd facelift made her eyebrows look perpetually surprised. The one who majored in art history instead of finance, because God forbid someone in the family actually appreciate the stolen cultural artifacts hanging on our walls rather than just using them as collateral. For the last 15 years, my role was clearly defined. I was the family's fixer, archivist, and secret keeper. You see, when you have that much money, you generate a commensurate amount of mess. And messes need to be cleaned up by someone who is both competent and expendable. Someone who doesn't exist on the official family tree, but who knows where all the bodies, both literal and figurative, are buried. My father, Preston III, a man whose personality was a cross between a granite countertop and a disappointed sigh, once told me at a charity gala, "Eleanor, your greatest talent is being invisible enough to be useful." He said it like it was a compliment. I smiled, took a sip of my champagne, and mentally catalogued the fact that his mistress, a former Olympic equestrian named Bambi, was currently locked in the library closet because she'd shown up drunk and started a small fire with a monogrammed candle. I was the family's unofficial chief officer of shoveling shit. I handled the NDAs for Fourth's various indiscretions with junior analysts. I coordinated the discreet medical evacuations for Cordelia's husband after his annual hunting accident, Code 4, tried to ride a Vespa through a vineyard while plastered on Armagnac. I managed the paperwork that kept our charitable foundation, the one that supposedly funded children's literacy, from being investigated for being a glorified tax shelter. And I did it all for a pittance. An allowance that was tied up in a family trust that I couldn't touch without a cosign from my father. A role that had no title, no salary, and no health insurance. I lived in a small carriage house on the Newport compound, a place they referred to as your little cottage, with a smirk, as if my 800-square-foot apartment was a charming eccentricity rather than a gilded cage. The breaking point, the moment the tree finally said enough, came on a crisp October morning. I had spent the previous 3 weeks orchestrating the quiet sale of a questionable Modigliani from my father's private collection. It was a piece with, let's call it, murky provenance. A certain Jewish family in Vienna had a rather compelling claim to it, and the statute of limitations was about to become a very inconvenient memory. My father had tasked me with finding a buyer in Geneva who wouldn't ask too many questions. I did. I spent 72 hours without sleep, negotiating through intermediaries, dealing with offshore accounts, and ensuring the entire transaction was untraceable. I was exhausted, running on espresso and spite. I walked into the main house, still in the same cashmere sweater I'd worn for 3 days, clutching the final documentation. I found my father, my mother, Fourth, and Cordelia, who was on a holographic call from France because she couldn't even be bothered to be physically present for my humiliation, gathered in the library. The war room, they called it. They were reviewing the quarterly trust disbursements. My father looked up from his leather-bound ledger. Eleanor. The Modigliani? I placed the folder on the mahogany desk. Done. Net proceeds, after the Geneva firm's cut, are in the Grand Cayman account. The paper trail is clean. My mother, who was pretending to read a copy of Town and Country, but was really just angling her face toward the best light, didn't even look up. Good. Now we can finalize the trust. Fourth leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He had the same granite jaw as my father, but with the smugness dialed up to 11. Speaking of which, We've been reviewing the disbursement schedule for the family trust. Dad and I were talking. Whenever Forth said Dad and I were talking, it meant they had decided something that would actively screw me over while framing it as a favor. My father cleared his throat. Eleanor, your role in the family has always been supportive. We appreciate that. But the trust principle needs to be preserved for the next generation. Forth's children. Cordelia's children. The future of the Winthrop Smythe name. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What are you saying? Cordelia's holographic form shimmered on the screen. Her voice was syrupy, the tone she used when she was about to deliver a killing blow wrapped in velvet. Darling, we're saying it's time you stood on your own 2 feet. You're 42. You have a perfectly lovely little place. We've decided to restructure. You'll receive a final lump sum of, well, enough to get you started somewhere charming, like Portland or wherever it is people with art history degrees go. And then the trust will be dispersed to the bloodline heirs. The legitimate ones. The subtext was so thick you could have used it to patch the Titanic. I wasn't a bloodline heir in their eyes. I was stuff. I was the help that shared their DNA. I looked at my father. I just spent 3 weeks laundering a painting that was almost certainly stolen from Holocaust victims. For you. For this family. I've spent 15 years covering up your affairs, Forth's sexual harassment settlements, and the fact that Cordelia's husband has the alcohol tolerance of a jet engine. And you're cutting me off. My mother finally looked up from her magazine. Eleanor, don't be so dramatic. It's not cutting you off. It's incentivizing independence. And we'd prefer you not use words like laundering. It's so gauche. We were simply repatriating a work of art to a more appreciative owner. Forth smirked. Look, Elle, you've always been a bit of a black sheep. It's time you embraced it. Find yourself. Maybe write a novel about your tragic, bohemian life. That's what the less fortunate do, isn't it? Something inside me didn't just snap. It didn't break. It performed a slow, deliberate, and surgical severance. The part of me that had craved their approval, that had hoped if I was useful enough, they'd finally see me as one of them, it died in that mahogany-scented room. In its place, something cold and precise took root. I smiled. A real, wide, terrifying smile that made Forth's smirk falter. You know what? I said, picking up the Modigliani file. You're absolutely right. I think I will go find myself. Thank you. I turned and walked out, leaving them in a confused silence. I heard my father mutter, she'll be back. She has nowhere else to go. He was wrong. I had a place to go. I had a plan. Phase 1, the inventory. You see, for 15 years, I had been the keeper of the family's secrets. Not just the embarrassing ones. The actionable ones. I had digital copies of everything. I had backed up their emails, their financial transactions, their little offshore shell companies, onto a series of encrypted hard drives that I kept in a safe deposit box under a fake name at a bank in Providence. I was the family archivist, after all. I had simply archived a bit too thoroughly. I spent the next 6 months playing possum. I moved out of the Newport carriage house, citing a desire for a change of scenery. I rented a small, unassuming apartment in a triple-decker house in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was the least Winthrop Smythe place I could find. My neighbors were a retired mechanic named Sal who fixed lawnmowers on his porch, and a nurse named Keisha who worked nights and had a pit bull with a perpetually guilty face. I loved it. I told my family I was taking some time. They assumed I was having a nervous breakdown. They were half right. During this time, I cultivated a very specific persona with them. I became the sad, defeated black sheep. I sent my mother a text asking for her recipe for the family's famous lobster bisque, which was actually just the recipe from the Newport Country Club, which I knew because I'd typed it up for the cook. I called Forth and asked for investment advice on my final lump sum, listening to him condescend for 20 minutes about index funds while I muted myself and read a book about forensic accounting. I even sent Cordelia a gushing DM about her children's adorable, matching berets. They ate it up. They thought I was broken. They thought I was gone. What I was actually doing was assembling the most comprehensive dossier on a single family since the Pinkertons tailed Jesse James. I had the financials asterisk a complete map of the family's offshore holdings. Accounts in the Caymans, shell companies in Delaware that funneled money to a shell company in Luxembourg, the whole 9 yards. The charitable foundation was a masterpiece of grift. They donated a few overvalued paintings, taken massive deductions, and then leased the paintings back for a nominal fee, allowing them to collect insurance payouts when the paintings were conveniently damaged during transit. I had the emails where my father explicitly instructed the foundation CFO to inflate the appraisals. I had the spreadsheets. Fourth's indiscretions asterisk, I had the NDAs, the settlement agreements, and thanks to a bit of social engineering with a paralegal at his firm's outside counsel, a recording of a deposition where a junior associate described, in harrowing detail, the mentorship Fourth had provided. It was career-ending material. Cordelia's chateau life asterisk turns out, the crumbling French chateau that she portrayed as a fairy tale escape was actually a financial sinkhole. To maintain the facade, she and her count had been selling off family heirlooms, things that were technically held in a joint trust with my father, through a series of backdoor auctions in Brussels. She was stealing from the family to fund her influencer lifestyle. I had the auction catalogs, the provenance documents, and a particularly incriminating voicemail where she sobbed to her husband about Papa finding out about the Sèvres vases. The crown jewel asterisk my father's private art collection. For decades, he had acquired works with what he called aggressive connoisseurship. I called it what it was, art trafficking. The Modigliani was just the tip of a very, very old iceberg. I had spent years cross-referencing his acquisition records with databases of looted art from World War II, colonial plunder, and various other historical atrocities. I had a spreadsheet with over 60 pieces, each with a provenance gap that a semi-truck could drive through. Among them was a small, unassuming landscape by a minor Dutch Golden Age painter. It was worth maybe $200,000 on the open market. But it had been stolen from a Jewish family in Amsterdam in 1942. The family's sole surviving descendant, a 93-year-old woman named Ruth Altman, lived in a modest apartment in Queens. That was my in. Not the big guns. The human one. Phase 2, the Allies. I didn't go to the FBI first. I'm not an idiot. The FBI is a government agency. They move at the speed of bureaucracy. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast, before my father decided to restructure me out of existence entirely. I started with Ruth Altman. I found her through a Holocaust restitution organization. I didn't tell her who I was at first. I called her and said I was a researcher working on provenance issues. She was sharp as a tack, 93 years old with a voice like crinkled parchment, but a mind like a steel trap. She told me about her father, a dealer in old masters, who had hidden the little landscape, a Jacob van Roysdael, in the floorboards of their home before they fled. He never made it out. The painting, she learned decades later, had been acquired by a German officer, and then, after the war, it had surfaced in a New York gallery, where it was purchased by a private collector. A collector whose name, when she said it, made my blood run cold. Preston Winthrop Smythe III, she said, enunciating each syllable as if it were a curse. He bought it in 1963. I wrote him a letter once. He never replied. His lawyer sent me a letter threatening to sue for slander if I persisted. I sat in my Worcester apartment, listening to this woman's quiet, dignified grief, and I felt the last ember of any loyalty to my family burn to ash. Mrs. Altman, I said, I think it's time we persisted. I flew to New York. I met her at her apartment. She made me rugula that was so good it made me want to cry. I laid out my plan. I told her who I was. I expected her to slam the door in my face. Instead, she took my hand, her skin papery and cool, and said, "The sins of the fathers, child. They are not your sins. They are the heavy stones they choose to carry. It is time we relieve them of their burden." From there, things escalated quickly. I contacted a lawyer I knew, not a family lawyer, but a scrappy woman named Daria who specialized in art restitution and had a reputation for making billionaires sweat. Daria listened to my story for 30 minutes, then said, "Eleanor, if half of what you're telling me is true, you're not just a whistleblower. You're a nuclear warhead." I also reached out to the FBI's art crime team. Not with everything. Just with enough to get their attention. I gave them the Modigliani trail. I gave them the shell company in Geneva. I gave them the name of the intermediary my father used, a Swiss art dealer who was already under investigation for money laundering. And then, for the final piece, I reached out to the New York Times. Not the main desk. A specific investigative journalist named Marcus Chin, who had written several scathing pieces on the art world's role in hiding looted assets. I told him I had a story that would blow the doors off the intersection of old money, stolen art, and tax fraud. He agreed to meet me at a diner in Queens. I brought a single redacted page of my spreadsheet as a calling card. He looked at it, looked at me, and ordered a second cup of coffee. Phase 3, the trigger. I knew I needed a catalyst. Something that would force all the pieces to move at once. I couldn't have the FBI, the Times, and Ruth's lawsuit all trickling out piecemeal. My father's lawyers would bury each one individually. I needed a single, blinding flash. The family's annual harvest gala at the Newport compound was the perfect stage. It was the one night of the year when the entire Winthrop Smythe ecosystem, The donors, the politicians, the museum directors, the social climbers, gathered to pat each other on the back and pretend their money came from virtue rather than extraction. I RSVP'd. The response from my mother was a terse text, asterisk, we assumed you wouldn't come. Please don't make a scene. Wear the navy. Asterisk. I wore red. I arrived at 7:45 p.m., just as the cocktail hour was transitioning into the seated dinner. The compound was lit up like a Versailles knockoff. Tents with heaters, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, waiters circulating with champagne and lobster crostini. My mother saw me first. Her face, which was already pulled tight from the facelifts, seemed to retract further. She glided over, her voice a furious whisper. Eleanor, what are you wearing? And what are you doing here? This is a private event. I'm a private person, I said, smiling. A Winthrop Smythe. Remember? The bloodline heir you were so concerned about. I saw Forth across the room, mid-laugh with a state senator. Cordelia had actually flown in for this one, standing beside him in a gown that cost more than my car, fake smiling for a photographer from Vogue. I didn't go to my assigned table. Instead, I walked to the center of the main tent, where a massive ice sculpture of the family crest was melting into a puddle of gray goose. I pulled out my phone. I had a pre-written email scheduled to go out to a distribution list I'd created. Marcus Chin, the FBI Art Crime Team contact, the Manhattan DA's office, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the board of the Winthrop Smythe Family Foundation. The subject line was, Comprehensive Evidence of Fraud, Theft, and Criminal Conduct by Preston Winthrop Smythe III and the Winthrop Smythe Family Enterprise. I didn't send it yet. Instead, I waited for the moment my father took the stage to give his annual toast. He was in his element, tuxedo perfect, silver hair gleaming, holding a crystal glass of Macallan 25. He tapped a spoon against the glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice the same granite monotone he'd used to dismiss my entire existence. Family, friends, distinguished guests. We gather tonight not just to celebrate another year of the Winthrop Smythe legacy, but to reaffirm our commitment to the values that have built this great nation. Philanthropy. Integrity. Family. I started walking toward the stage. He saw me. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. My youngest daughter, Eleanor, has decided to join us. Eleanor, always the independent spirit. I climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. The string quartet had stopped playing, sensing the shift. A few hundred people in designer gowns and suits turned to stare. Dad, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. I'd like to say a few words about family values. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned to the crowd. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the black sheep. The one you don't put in the family photos. The one who spent 15 years cleaning up the messes so the rest of you could pretend you were respectable. My father grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. That's enough, Eleanor. You've had too much to drink. I haven't had a drop, I said, wrenching my arm free. But let's talk about what you've had. You've had a Modigliani stolen from a Jewish family in Vienna. You've had a Van Roystal stolen from a family in Amsterdam, a family who is, by the way, filing a lawsuit for its return on Monday. You've had a charitable foundation that's a fraud, offshore accounts that are illegal, and a son who settled at least 4 sexual harassment claims using money from a trust that was supposed to fund children's literacy. Forth was striding toward the stage now, his face purple. Cordelia was on her phone, no doubt calling their lawyer. My mother looked like she was calculating whether fainting would be a dramatic enough distraction. I pulled out my phone. I held it up so the front rows could see the screen. I have emails. I have bank statements. I have spreadsheets. I have voicemails. I have everything. And in about 10 seconds, it's all going to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Times. My father's composure cracked. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. You're destroying this family, he hissed. No, I said, loud enough for the microphone to catch it. You destroyed it. I'm just providing the documentation. I pressed send. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the tent erupted. Phones started buzzing. People were staring at their screens, at my father, at me. Forth lunged for me, but a burly guest, a retired federal judge, as it turned out, stepped between us. I walked off the stage, through the stunned crowd, past my mother who was now genuinely hyperventilating, past Cordelia who was screaming something in French about disinheritance, and out of the tent. I got into my car, a 2012 Subaru Outback with a dent in the passenger door, and drove back to Worcester. The fallout was, to put it mildly, biblical. The Times article dropped 3 days later, a 5,000-word exposé by Marcus Chin that tied together the art theft, the tax fraud, and the family's history of using their foundation as a slush fund. It was the top story for a week. The FBI raided the Newport compound on a Tuesday morning. I watched it on the local news, sitting on my couch with a mug of tea and Mr. Snuggles, my neighbor Keisha's pit bull, who had taken to spending his days with me. The footage showed agents in windbreakers carrying out boxes of files, while my mother, wrapped in a white terrycloth robe, tried to block the cameras with a potted fern. Forth was fired from his private equity firm within 48 hours. The depositions became public. His wife, a woman named Buffy who had always treated me like a piece of furniture, filed for divorce the same week. Cordelia's influencer career imploded. The hashtag Chateau Fraud started trending after it came out that she'd been selling the family's antiques. The French count, never one for adversity, announced he was seeking spiritual clarity in the Seychelles and left her with the crumbling chateau and a tax bill the size of a small country's GDP. My father was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of tax evasion, and, this was my personal favorite, 1 count of interstate transportation of stolen property. His lawyers got him out on a $10 million bail, secured by the Newport compound, which was now under federal lien. He spent his days in the library, I was told, staring at the empty spaces on the walls where the Modigliani and the Van Roystal used to hang. Ruth Altman got her painting back. I was there when the FBI returned it to her in a small ceremony at her apartment in Queens. She held the little Van Roystal, a quiet, windswept landscape with a single tree bent against a gray sky, and she cried. And then she looked at me and said, "See? The tree remembers." The wholesome ending, the one where I ride off into the sunset, is the part you're probably expecting. And it's true as far as it goes. I became something of a reluctant folk hero. The black sheep of Newport. The whistleblower heiress. I did a 60 Minutes interview where I wore my red dress again and talked about the emotional labor of complicity. Daria, my lawyer, negotiated a deal where I received a substantial portion of the whistleblower award from the IRS. My father's tax fraud was so extensive that the government's recovery ran into the tens of millions. My cut was enough to buy my little Worcester triple-decker outright and set up a modest but comfortable life. I started a small consulting firm. I help other families, not the billionaire dynasties, but the ones with inherited estates, old collections, murky pasts, ethically untangle their provenance issues. I work with Holocaust restitution organizations. I do pro bono work for families who have had their heirlooms looted, helping them navigate the legal system. I found a purpose that wasn't cleaning up messes, but repairing them. I stayed in Worcester. Sal, the mechanic, taught me how to change my own oil. Keisha and I became best friends. We have a standing Friday night ritual of takeout and bad reality TV. Mr. Snuggles, the pit bull with the guilty face, officially became mine when Keisha moved to a place that didn't allow dogs. He sleeps on my bed, taking up 80% of the space, and snores like a chainsaw. I found peace. I found community. I found a life that was mine, not a gilded annex to theirs. I hadn't spoken to any member of my family in 3 years. I got the occasional drunk text from Cordelia, usually a string of emojis and the word traitor in French. Forth's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter about a podcast I'd been quoted in. I used it as kindling for a fire pit in my backyard. My father's trial was a media circus. He was convicted on 2 of the 3 counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. My mother, who had spent her entire life curating an image of unassailable wasp perfection, divorced him 3 months into his sentence to protect her remaining assets. She moved to a condo in Palm Beach and told the Palm Beach Daily News that she was starting a new chapter. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't attend the divorce. I was done. And now here's the twist. The unexpected part that even I didn't see coming. A month ago, I got a letter. It was hand-delivered by a process server, which made my heart rate spike until I saw it wasn't a subpoena. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a Newport return address. The handwriting was my mother's, that loopy, Palmer method script she used for thank you notes and poison pen letters. I almost threw it away. But Keisha, who was over for our Friday night ritual, said, "Girl, if you don't open that, I will." My curiosity is a curse. I opened it. Inside was a letter and a key. The letter was brief, which was unlike my mother, who could stretch a simple insult into 3 paragraphs. Eleanor. Asterisk, your father is in prison. Forth is living in a studio apartment in Hoboken and working as a financial consultant for a company that sells timeshares. Cordelia's chateau was seized by the French government for unpaid taxes. She and the children are living with me in Palm Beach, and I can assure you it is the 7th circle of hell. Asterisk. Asterisk, I am not writing to apologize. I am not writing to reconcile. I am writing because I am old, I am tired, and I am the only one left who knows where the key goes. Asterisk. Asterisk the Newport compound was seized by the federal government, but before they took it, I had a few things moved. There's a safe deposit box at the Providence Bank. The one you used to use, under your fake name. I know about it. I've always known. You weren't as invisible as you thought. Asterisk. Asterisk the key is to a storage unit in Cranston. I put some things there that I couldn't bear to see auctioned off by the marshals. They are not the things you think. They are the things your grandmother Winthrop left for you in a separate trust, one your father never knew about because I never told him. She was the only one in the family who saw you. She called you the fierce one. Asterisk. Asterisk, I will be dead soon, I imagine. The melanoma they found last spring is not responding to treatment. I'm telling you this not for sympathy, but so you understand, this is not a trap. It's a key. Do with it what you will. Asterisk. Your mother. Beatrice. I read the letter 3 times. Keisha read it over my shoulder. Your mom sounds like a real peach, she said. She's a masterpiece of passive aggression, I said. But she's telling the truth about the melanoma. I saw a blind item in a society column a few months back. Palm Beach socialite battling private health crisis. The key sat on my kitchen table for a week. I told myself it was a trick. Some final, elaborate scheme to drag me back into their orbit. But the key was real. And the storage unit was in Cranston, a 20-minute drive. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday, I drove to Cranston. The storage facility was a bland, beige building on a commercial strip next to a laundromat and a pawn shop. Unit 47. I unlocked the padlock, pulled up the metal door, and flicked on the overhead light. The unit was filled with about a dozen wooden crates, the kind used by art movers. My heart pounded. I pried open the first crate. It wasn't paintings. It wasn't silver. It wasn't jewelry. The first crate was filled with photo albums. Old ones, with leather covers and brass corners. I opened the top one. It was my grandmother Winthrop, my father's mother, the one who died when I was 12. I remembered her as a formidable woman with silver hair and a wicked sense of humor. She'd taught me to play poker and told me that anyone who takes themselves too seriously deserves to be taken down a peg. The album was filled with pictures of me. Not the family portraits where I was standing stiffly in the back row. These were candid shots. Me at age 5, covered in mud, holding up a worm with a look of pure joy. Me at 9, before Utah, reading a book in the library with my grandmother's old cat on my lap. Me at 15, home for the holidays from boarding school, looking awkward and defiant, standing next to my grandmother in her garden. There was a note tucked into the album, written on a piece of my grandmother's personalized stationery. Eleanor. Asterisk if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Beatrice finally did the one decent thing I asked of her. I'm sorry it took her so long. She was always more afraid of your father than she was of me. Asterisk. Asterisk, you were always my favorite, and I'm not just saying that. I'm saying it because it's true, and because someone in this family should have said it to you out loud. You have the fire. The rest of them have the ash. Asterisk. Asterisk, the other crates contain the real trust. Not the one your father controlled. This one is mine, money I made before I married into that family of pompous thieves. It's not dirty. It's from a textile company my father started in 1922. It's been sitting in a blind trust, managed by a firm in Boston, accumulating interest for 30 years. The contact information is in the second crate. It's yours. No strings. No conditions. No family oversight. Asterisk. Asterisk, burn the rest of it down, my fierce one. And then build something new. Asterisk. With all my love. Grandmother Winthrop. Asterisk, but you can call me Mimi like you used to. Asterisk. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit, surrounded by crates of my grandmother's legacy, and I cried. I cried for the little girl who had been sent away. I cried for the woman who had spent 15 years trying to earn love that was never going to come. And I cried for my grandmother, who had seen me, who had planned for me, who had quietly, from beyond the grave, given me the one thing my family had never offered, unconditional validation. So here's where I am now. I didn't burn the money. I'm not an idiot. But I did use it to expand my consulting firm into a full-fledged nonprofit. The Ruth Altman Foundation for Art Restitution and Ethical Legacy. We help families reclaim looted art, we provide pro bono legal services, and we work with museums to clean up their provenance records. Ruth is our honorary chair. She's 96 now and still sharp as a tack. She comes to our office in Providence once a week, and she and Mr. Snuggles have a special bond. He sits under her desk and rests his head on her feet while she makes phone calls to museum directors, terrifying them into doing the right thing. I bought the triple-decker in Worcester. Sal lives in one unit, rent-free, in exchange for maintaining the property. Keisha and her new wife, a paramedic named Chloe, live in the other. We have a communal garden in the back where we grow tomatoes and argue about who's going to water them. On weekends, we sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood go by. My mother died 6 months after sending that letter. I didn't go to the funeral. Cordelia called me, screaming, calling me every name in the book. I let her scream, then said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and hung up. It was the most generous thing I could offer. Fort's timeshare, consulting, job fizzled. Last I heard, he was living in a trailer park in Arizona, trying to start a podcast about cancel culture. I hope he finds peace. I genuinely do. But I'm not going to be the one to help him find it. My father is still in federal prison. He's up for parole next year. I received a letter from him a few weeks ago, his first attempt at contact since the trial. It was 3 pages of self-justification and blame, ending with a request that I use my influence to help him get an early release. I sent back a single sentence on a postcard, asterisk, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Asterisk, I don't know if he understood it. I don't care. As for the unexpected twist, the one I promised, it's this: I'm happy. Not the brittle, performative happiness of my family's Instagram feeds. Not the gilded, transactional happiness of the Newport compound. A real, messy, complicated, deeply satisfying happiness. I have work that matters. I have people who love me not for what I can clean up, but for who I am. I have a dog who thinks I'm the greatest person in the world, even when I come home smelling like the Thai takeout place down the street. The tree remembers. But it also grows new branches. It puts down roots. It finds sunlight. I found mine. TLDR, my family treated me like the help for 15 years, so I documented all their crimes, exposed them at their own gala, sent my father to federal prison, and used my secret inheritance from my grandmother to start a nonprofit that helps Holocaust survivors recover looted art. I now live in a triple-decker in Worcester with my pit bull and my chosen family, and I've never been happier. Asterisk, asterisk.